3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm the host of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, Joe Sallin. I'm joined tonight by
Andrew Dennison,
Trent Ham,
and we have a special episode planned for everybody here with a designer guest who is widely known among maybe the listeners of this podcast as designer, sort of a protege of Phil Eklund, who's branched off and done some things of his own, released through Hollandspiel. Anyway, I will really quickly let you introduce yourself, Cole. Cole Wehrle, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear. You've had kind of a turbulent last few months here in terms of just having to move, pick everything up and move, and now you're working full-time in the game industry?
Right. As of, I guess, mid-August, or yeah, somewhere around there, I am one of the few people who has a full-time job in the game industry. I am a game designer and developer for Leader Games in St. Paul. And it's been a wild ride. I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, no kidding, man. I'm so excited to hear about that, and just what a long, strange trip it's been. It's, ended you up there within driving distance of most of the members of this podcast. So anyway,
that's true.
It will be great.
Bye, you guys.
Yeah,
it was hard to see through all the corn.
Andy once shared a YouTube video while we were having internet troubles, and what was it? The I-80 Iowa song, like corn, 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 corn,
Yeah, that's
corn,
basically
Des Moines, corn, corn, corn. Yeah, and Trent's links were just like creepy, and then Andy's were just like dad jokes. So
I'm a dad. I'm allowed to pull those off now.
No excuse for that. You're forgiven.
So we will be interviewing Cole as our topic tonight, and I'm just really pumped to have you on here, Cole, and really excited to ask some questions and just see your design philosophy and how that's fitting into your new position, and just all around what's going on, man. So
all right.
Yeah, we'll kick everything off here, though, by reviewing some games. Everybody's picked a game to review. Everybody's picked a game to hype, which we'll do on our way out the door. And before we get started, thanks to our sponsor, Game Surplus. Find them at gamesurplus.com. They're an excellent online game store that gives you the type of care and love you would expect from a friendly local game store. Carmen's an excellent guy. Just really check out what they have to offer. And if they don't have something you're looking for, send them an email, games@gamesurplus.com. So check them out and tell them that the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly sent you. So let's go ahead and start off with our most exciting moment here for Andy, I think, of all. And Cole, as the guest of honor here, you'll get to start us off with a game that I think Andy is maybe going to try to reach through the screen and grab from you.
Well, I do have an extra copy, but you can't have it.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Andy, not for you. No.
Yeah, it's not for you. I don't know who's going to get it yet. So I want to talk a little bit about Hollandspiel's Forex. So this is a game that I got an advanced copy of, and I've been playing it a bunch over the last couple of months, and it will be out in mid-October. And the thing to know about Hollandspiel, if you're not familiar with them, is that they run on a print-on-demand model. So when the game is out, you will just send them an email, or you'll put it in an order, and then they'll fulfill it. And I think it's just. I think that there is an audience for this game, and it's going to do really well. And so usually they build up like a little backlog of orders so that they can fulfill very quickly. And I would recommend, if you're interested in it, making sure to order it right away, because you don't want to have to wait for like the second wave of cards or anything. So this game is called Forex, and it's designed by Tom Russell, the company's founder, who, if you've ever Tom's designs, there is a kind of like mad brilliance to them. They are so different and from any other designer working. They're idiosyncratic and very interactive, but that there's a simplicity to their rules that it's just wonderful. He made a name for himself with a series of winsomes, Northern Pacific, and then Irish Gauge, and there have been more since then. And then he's also, so he founded this wargaming company, and he's been, I mean, they've been churning out, it seems like a game a month. It's not quite that, but it's close. And Forex is about currency trading. And he apparently has been sitting on this design for a long time and was hesitant to publish it, or rather publishers were hesitant to publish it because it's so mathy and strange, and it's just a table. I mean, when you set it on the board, it's striking because it looks so different from any other game. But it also could instantly turn off about 95% of all gamers because it's just a bunch of numbers. Now, full disclosure, I helped in the playtesting a little bit, and I also did the graphics for it. And I will say it was the hardest graphics job I've ever gotten, because when he gave me the files, it seemed done just because I didn't know how much I could do to a bunch of numbers. But I spent some time with it, and I think we got it looking pretty good. So as far as like a sense of the play goes, I have been struggling with this game as long as I've been in helping with the development, because it is, I've never played a game that asked me to that asked me to dismiss so many of my preconceptions about how games should work. So you start the game. Start the game, and there's just no guidance, and it's difficult. Like, even in a train game, you might start by saying like, "Oh, well, I should make my company make money, or I should buy the shares of the companies that are making money." And none of that happens here. Like, everything is so hydraulic, where like sometimes buying shares is a terrible thing that we would never want to do. And oftentimes you want to be holding on to your money. So for instance, whenever you buy a share, everyone who's got the currency strengthens, right? So if I buy a share of Chinese yen, like I invest in Chinese property, I lose that money because I've locked it up in Chinese land. But I've just made the Chinese yen stronger. So everybody that didn't buy a share, their Chinese yen is now worth more money. So it's a really strange, naughty game, very, very interactive. I've sometimes described it as like a double layer shareholding game or portfolio management game, where you have shares and you're looking for your partners there. But you also have to pay attention to who's got what kind of money. So in the course of the game, you're trading 7 different kinds of currencies, and the values of their currencies are set in pairs according to those other currencies, but they have no intrinsic value. And at the end of the game, one currency is going to be declared the strongest currency, and then everything cashes into that currency, and that's your score at the end of the game. Now, the mechanism by which money is introduced into the game, well, there are 2 mechanisms. One of them is that shares do pay dividends occasionally. But the main mechanism is that you can set contracts with the bank based on the current exchange rate, but fulfilled later. So essentially the whole game is happening in futures contracts. So like I might, and there are no limits to these things. So I could say, okay, let's say the pound is trading like 1 to 4 against the Chinese yen. I could say, hey, I'll give the bank 10 pounds and I want to get 40 yen. And so I like arrange that little deal. And then later on, if I can get, that money quite easily, I'll make a huge run. But the positions are very vulnerable. It's easy for other players to disrupt them. And so the way that I've come to think about this game is I think it's the best game about bank heists that's ever been made. Because you kind of need to have another 1 or another 2 players in on the deal in order for it to work. And of course, the deals start disintegrating as the game goes farther and farther. But it's really fabulous. And so I would fully, if you find yourself liking interactive portfolio games, this is about as hard-hitting as they're going to come. On the reverse side, if you'd rather not think about those numbers, do not purchase this game, because it will offer you nothing else but those numbers. But it's one of the most exciting games I've played all year, and it's been a pretty good year for games so far. So, I mean, I heartily recommend it.
Okay, I have an initial question. I'm just going to throw this at you.
course.
I'm very, very into this game. It's going to be instant order for me. Have you ever played Rolling Stock, and how does it compare to that?
Yeah, Rolling Stock. I have played Rolling Stock. It is the thing about Rolling Stock. Both games share a kind of skeletal simplicity. Like Rolling Stock can be a tough game to learn and play, but the core rules are very straightforward, and Forex is similar in that regard. But Rolling Stock has a lot of upkeep. You have to spend a lot of time like with the book value, and like it's one of those games that is just it's benefited greatly from the app that Toby built. I can't remember Toby's last name. That online platform that plays Rolling Stock is really lovely because it does so much of that work for you.
Rollingstock.net.
I just can't remember the guy who made. I can't remember his last name.
Toby Mao.
It's fabulous. Anyway, Forex is not like I think Rolling Stock benefits a lot from players who are very precise in their planning. And in Forex, that precision can matter, but I've actually found that it can be played like from the hip a little bit. And I don't mean that as like a slam for people who like. All I mean to suggest about Forex is that so much of the game is about understanding the board position and manipulating the relationships between the players. And it doesn't have a what's sometimes called like a single dollar brittleness. I can't remember whose term that is. I'm stealing it from myself, which is used to describe 18xx games where you'd be like short $1. That almost never happens in Forex. Like you make a
Rolling Stock.
It definitely happens in Rolling Stock, and like that it's. So I find that the game is a little bit looser, but I mean that like the best possible way, where you can play it instinctively a little bit. And I haven't. It's one of the problems I have with Forex, and this isn't a bad thing at all. It's just I've played it maybe a dozen times, and I'm still finding myself struggling thinking through strategies, because there is so much happening that sometimes. So much of the game is not happening on the board. So it can be difficult to describe the thing that led you to the win. Last night, I just played a game, and we had a long conversation after the game trying to figure out what was the pivotal move that led to this one player winning that no one thought was going to win. And it was a pretty rousing discussion because it's hard to locate those things because so much of the game is happening in the minds of the players. I haven't found that true of Rolling Stock, where I can usually point to specific moves pretty easily. Does that kind of answer your question, Trent?
Yeah.
So yeah, go buy Forex if you like that kind of stuff.
I definitely do. It's on my buy list. I think it's on Andy's as well.
Yep. No, Tom had a sale out of me as soon as he described it as what was it? That 18xx publishers wouldn't publish it because it was too nerdy for 18xx players. At that moment, I was like, sold. I need to know nothing else.
I'm surprised that nobody picked it up to publish it. I think it's fabulous. But I can see that there has been an audience that has emerged for it in the past, 3 years or so that might not have been there. But there is like a simplicity to it that's pretty lovely. I highly recommend it. I think it's great.
I would say, in a way, what it made me think of is, as a big fan of Age of Steam, you go from Age of Steam, which does have that phrase that you ripped off from somewhere, but I love that phrase, single dollar brittleness. That happens in Age of Steam so frequently, whereas Tramways does not have that single dollar brittleness because it's basically the amount of money you make is dependent entirely on other players. You're never really using money to fuel your actions.
Mm-hmm.
It's all tied to like cards and stress. And so it takes out that single dollar brittleness. And for that reason, I think I'm more of a fan of Age of Steam because I think I really like that aspect of like a decision I made is going to come back and either I have the money now or I don't. But I understand what you're saying with Forex. It sounds like it's a lot more about just like manipulating that sort of like you own 2 stocks in this, he owns a stock in this and a stock in this. What's the right move based on where you're at with all the currencies?
Yeah, it has. The one other thing I should mention about Forex is it has a very weird pacing. that is sometimes it'll like halt and the game kind of like ossifies and turns into stone, and then something like there's always one player being screwed at any one particular moment. And rounds will go by, and as soon as the one player realizes that he's been like left out in the cold, he'll pull the ripcord, and then the whole game will start falling apart in really lovely ways. But the plans, like, and this is why I like thinking about like a bank heist game, because it's all about robbing the bank and using those futures contracts. Like, so you are, last game I played, the game started with someone making a very ambitious futures trade for a bunch of Chinese yen, which start the game at a very like favorable exchange rate. Like you can get tons of them. Mm-hmm. And the move that I made to counter him was not to foil his plan, but to draft behind it. I'm like, all right, well, if you have a big stack of yen, I know that my big stack of yen is safe. And so it feels a little bit like a racing game sometimes where you're drafting behind, but there are so many instruments for creating like really elaborate traps. And sometimes you can get lost in your own traps and even trigger them a little bit. If you've ever played like that abstract game like Zerts, that will sometimes happen too, where you like build this really elaborate trap to knock off your opponent, and then you end up falling into it yourself. And yeah, so I mean, it is so different. It's so singular as far as economic games go, because there really is nothing like it.
Really interesting. And the way that you've mentioned that the sort of balance is very fragile to what other players do reminds me of some of your designs, specifically in Infamous Traffic. That was kind of, one player will be in a position that's less favorable, not in charge of anything, and they can kind of pull the trigger and cause the entire supply line to be broken.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Tom and I, when it comes to the more economic-y games that we work on, have a similar aesthetic. His designs tend to be a little cleaner than mine, and I really admire that about them. But we both look for those kinds of emergent partnerships. I mean, really, my whole project is about creating strange intimacies in games, and I feel like Tom does that as well as anybody I know working. When I gave them Infamous Traffic, and I've said this elsewhere, but it bears repeating, their company didn't really exist yet. They had asked me to do that design about 6 months before they started selling games. And when I gave it to them, I didn't know what kind of company it was going to be, really. I mean, I had a sense of it, but I told them, like, yeah, change whatever you want. And they were really happy with it. And I think I got lucky in that the game spoke to the kind of games that they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the people who like Infamous Traffic, I often say, like, a lot of the stuff in the Hollenspiel's catalog is 2 players, but if you look at any of Tom's designs, you'll probably find something there you really like, because they're Infamous Traffic is very at home at their company. I've had many mm-hmm. offers for that game for people who've wanted to develop it and have offered me, not huge sums of cash, but what is for this field large sums of cash. And I just can't imagine it anywhere else. I'm so happy that Tom and Mary, like, it's in their catalog. That's exactly where it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it finds the right customers there. Crazy people like Andy.
Yes. Abby needs more of you.
Speaking of Andy, he's going to be telling us about another game in the Hollenspiel catalog.
Yeah, so I am going to talk a little bit about, I don't think it's is it their newest?
I think it is.
Yeah, Table Battles. So Table Battles is a 2-player war game filler, I think is how it's billed. Basically take some cards. You pick a battle. The scenario tells you what units you get. You play those out on the table, and then there's interactions between the different units on the table, where, like, some cards can only attack other cards. Some can counterattack or screen, block, all those kind of things. So it's kind of like weirdly simulating the interactions like units would take on a map is the way I think about it. Okay. But what I found really interesting, like I got the game initially just because I'm like, okay, maybe this will be a cool little filler. The thing that really struck me about it being different, though, was how the phases work. Because often in these games like this where you use dice to select actions, a lot of these games, you roll the dice, then you take your actions based on what the dice have. The thing that I think makes this interesting is that flip-flops in table battles to where you have to take actions and then roll your dice, setting up for your next round. But the problem is then your opponent goes and he sees what kind of dice you've just put out and can then place dice in an effort to counter this stuff. So the game ends up being this really interesting aspect of tempo. So typically, from what I've read and found in this game, if you just kind of go all crazy attacky, and just keep attacking and don't use some of these blocking abilities you have, you're basically going to not come out ahead on that. So your goal is to control the tempo. If the other player has you on the ropes, keep doing the defense and setting up an attack to when maybe the dice work out or he's exhausted a character or whatever, you can strike and hit back big. That seems to be kind of a general strategy you need to use in these battles. But I think the thing I like about it is it doesn't pretend to be more than it is. It's a quick filler. It's a little dice game. It's very tactical. But for a game that takes 15 minutes, there's some decent fun decisions there. The box comes with 8 battles in it. And they've already talked about how they're going to now release expansions because this is a system. So the next deck of battles and character cards is going to be released, I think, in early 2018. And this was going to be themed after the real War of Roses. So basically what they've got is this nice little war game filler system that they can just print off a set of cards. Here's an expansion, add it to the system. I think for just a little filler, it's got a couple really clever things that actions first, dice later, I found to be very interesting. So that is Table Battles, also by Hollenspiel.
How different do the different scenarios feel? I'm curious about it.
We've played, I think, 2 so far. We haven't got any of the ones where you get to use artillery yet. Just randomly, we picked a couple. The first one we played was very much more defensive. Like almost everybody had the ability to screen a unit, which would prevent an attack. And then Joe and I played another one last night where there was much less screening but counterattack. So it's like every time I'm going to punch a character, they're going to punch me back. So really,
I would say that the feel between them was that the first one that we played felt like there were these lots of small battalions that had their own special rules in the first one, and none of them had tons and tons of health, but there was more like backup units and just a little bit more like, I don't know, it felt like you had more possible places to station dice. And in the second game, there was a little bit more interaction with that you kind of had, like, at least on my side. Andy's side was quite different. Andy's side was just like tons of meat shields. Like it was just so hard for me to get through anything because he just had so many big guys with lots of hit points. And it was kind of the same thing on my side, but I had like a little crap or a big crappy guy over here that I could always use a special ability for to just sop up damage. I don't know. It was a different dynamic. Like Andy said, the first one had a lot of guys that you didn't want to die that had pretty low health points. So you're really trying to manage where you were putting your dice in that one to make sure that these guys that had good effects didn't die on you. In the second one, you were pretty much like, you had lots of hit points, but almost every attack you did resulted in you losing health as well as your opponent. And so you were just kind of hoping, like Andy said, to get the tempo up enough so that you could do 3 or 4 damage for every one that you've suffered yourself. So I got the feeling like very much so that every charge that I did in the second game was almost as damaging to me as it was to my opponent. Whereas in the first game, it was much more like a kind of punch and, like retract. The second game felt like it was definitely overextending, but try to hit the best in the way I overextended.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it was quite a bit within the confines of the game system, it was interesting to see the different things that were being explored. I mean, it still does suffer quite a bit from it's very abstracted, like, words on cards abstracted. You're not seeing, like, I really would like to see a little bit more. The theme to me, which I think, your historical wargamer might come at it from an aspect of knowing a little bit more what's going on. I feel like this is the type of theme where I can Wikipedia the battle and then like read the Wikipedia page, and that would would almost do necessary background to really understand, because I had the Wikipedia page in our first game, Andy, of this battle, and it made it more interesting because in the second one, I didn't pull up the Wikipedia battle, and I honestly don't know very much about the battle having finished it. It's just such a very condensed game.
Interesting.
I don't have anything to say.
So,
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, it's one definitely, like, wargamers should definitely give it a shot. I mean, it's got this scenario, it knows its depth, it knows its length. If it was any longer than that, I would probably not be okay with it. It's just the right length and has enough different little varieties for you to try a little battle and see what the designers, played with. I think it's tough to get past the mechanics of it still with how condensed the gameplay is, but it's definitely something, if you know that you like the war games that Hollandspiel puts out, this is an insta buy, I would think. So that was Table Battles by Hollandspiel. And now, Trent, why don't you, we haven't heard from you in a little while, why don't you tell us about maybe what you've been doing while we were reviewing games?
Well, I'm getting all excited about playing Munchkin Flux.
Yep. Tell us about Munchkin Flux. What changes the Flux formula that's such a winning formula?
At the end of the game of this one, everybody falls asleep because the game is so boring.
By design, though, you got to understand it's intentional.
It's by design, right?
Okay, I'm actually going to talk about the Through the Ages app rather than Munchkin Flux.
That's what I was saying. That's probably what you were doing while you were in the background there, saying, "I've
I
never
will
played
neither
it."
confirm nor deny that I may have been making mention in the Through the Ages app game.
I got you.
This is why Trent doesn't use live video.
Also, he records in his bathroom.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, I'll say this much. Last week it was a good thing that I didn't have my video on because my 7-year-old son just came in the bathroom, did his business, and left without realizing I was in there.
Good thing there's a little mute button.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to talk about Through the Ages app, which I'm going to say right now is the single best board game app I have played on a device. Period. I don't unequivocally say that without any question. I've played a lot of them. This is the best one from top to bottom. It handles multiplayer. Okay, so first of all, I'm not going to review Through the Ages as a game. I'm going to say it's a very, very good game. It's involved civilization game that's entirely card-based. It has a lot of tough decisions throughout it, and it gives a great sense of civilization progression. Wonderful game. So instead, I'm just going to talk about the app implementation and what it does. It pretty much checks every box that you'd want from an app. It looks good on your phone. It has a sensible interface. It manages to compress a lot of options into a limited screen space without ever feeling overly crowded. It handles online asynchronous multiplayer beautifully. You just take turns. When your turn's up, it tells you like you need to take a turn, and you do, and it just is like it should be. It just works. The thing that's really beautiful about this, and the thing that really impresses me, is how well the single player works. You can play against AIs, and the AIs are pretty tough, I've got to say. The AIs do not cut you much slack in this. But the best part is the challenges. If you've had this app and you haven't touched on the challenges tab, you need to, because that's just amazing. What it is, it just presents a bunch of different scenarios to play Ticket to Ride that alters some of the key rule of the game or something like this. And it seems like this one little rules change won't change the game that much, but it ends up changing it a ton. You end up finding yourself using cards that you would have, in a normal game, you would just practically ignore and overlook because they wouldn't fit in. But in this one, you're really looking at them. Charlie Chaplin suddenly becomes a hugely desired card, and in most games he's not, unless you're playing a 4-player game and someone's really committed to that kind of strategy. It's amazing how much the game changes with these little just tweaks. In fact, it's so much so that I kind of wish they would do something akin to this in the actual Through the Ages expansion that's coming. Like how they have a number of these could easily work on a tabletop scenario in some fashion, or with some modification could work that way. And I would very much enjoy seeing them. In a way, you can also use them to handicap players a little bit, and it'd be a very clever way to do it. But I think that they're showing is that Through the Ages as a game engine has a lot of potential to it for a lot of variation. It's one that I didn't really perceive when I was playing it, but playing through those challenges really shows me more about what the game itself can do. So basically, everything you can possibly want in a board game app is here. 2 problems: it's fairly expensive as a board game app goes. It's $9.95 unless you're on board with a sale. And 2, it sucks battery like no tomorrow.
Yeah, that's not true.
So that's the only 2 real drawbacks with it. But if you're near an AC outlet on occasion and and you don't mind spending $10 for a great experience, this is probably my favorite board game app. It used to be Twilight Struggle. This has surpassed it.
Wow, that's pretty high praise. Have you played that one at all, Cole?
I've played Through the Ages, the board game, and I've played Twilight Struggle in the app. And the Twilight Struggle app has long been my, or not long, but like as long as it's been out, I thought that's been the gold standard for how to do an app right.
I agree. I was badly hooked on the Twilight Struggle app. My wife got tired of me playing it at bedtime every single night for a long
Oh, that has been me for like the last 2 or 3 weeks, however long Through the Ages app has been out. So like, I'm gonna go to bed early tonight, and then it's like 11:45, and I'm like, I got to restart the scenario one more time. I swear I get it this time. So I'm right there with you, Trent. This is an incredible app. What really impresses me is that I can be playing a challenge on my own. It'll notify me when I've got a turn to make. I'll be able to easily jump to that game, and then I can just easily jump right back into my current challenge. And I mean, it's, seamless, and it's almost instant. Like, there's no loading. Yes, it sucks the battery, but man, you're not sitting there waiting for load screens or anything. And the explorations, like you said, Trent, have plumbed the depths of what this design has to offer. I especially love the ones where you're like fighting against thematic foes like Napoleon and Joan of Arc and greed and lust and pride and envy. And there's just some really interesting things that they do that feel quite a bit like Pride will score 6 points every time that you let a wonder slide through the wonder aisle, or the drafting line, and what was it? I think Gluttony would get, every time a wonder would go through, would get like 4 food or something. So it's just kind of an interesting. You're sitting there like trying to build wonders as fast as you can so that they don't make it through. It was such a different dynamic I'd never seen before, and I think, Trent, that what you said, hopefully it'll make it to the board game form. Is actually probably not that far from the truth, or at least the possible truth, because look at Galaxy Trucker, an excellent app whose solo campaign modes innovations did eventually make it to a board game physical copy.
I have a feeling that that's what they're going to end up doing. I don't know that, but I would be really surprised if they didn't end up doing something like that.
We should make a fan expansion for it, where one of the leaders is Cole Wehrle, and his special ability is that you can take an action that takes your entire opponent's economy and just wipes all the yellow tokens off their board.
That may be
but
too
the kicker is it also happens to you. And now you've got to sort that mess out. Nah, that would be pretty sweet. But it's such a great app, man. And I think, Cole, you owe it to yourself. If you love Twilight Struggle app, it is a new gold standard for apps. Okay,
good. Yeah, I've got some friends who've been playing it, so I'm intrigued.
And once you get on there, man, you better drop your username to me, Andy, and Trent. We can do a 4-player battering ram match where we just all elephant seal slap each other around.
That sounds wonderful.
That was the game where Andy earned his chops. Like, Andy was, I'm just going to be science and nobody's going to touch what I do. And this is the game that converted Andy. I credit this one with converting Andy from a Eurogamer, I like to build something up, to, like, I remember the politics. Like, Andy, I was personal messaging Andy while we were playing this. This is back on the old, like, Board Game Arena version. Andy, if you don't get military, I will attack you. And Trent's even higher militarily than I am, and then he's going to attack you. And you're just going down, man. It was like I had to coach Andy, and I feel like I did a little bit of, like, getting him into the corner of the ring, slapping a little bit across the face, throwing water in his face, and now Andy's never been the same. I'm taking way too much credit there. But anyway, it was part of Andy's conversion for sure.
Yeah, now I'm known as the mean one.
I broke him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I was just a tool in that, which
Yeah,
is pretty much what I was.
I'll take responsibility for breaking Andy from being a nice gamer.
It was the old Napoleon into Gandhi strategy.
Right.
The Michelangelo Napoleon Gandhi, like the gravy train, as it was formerly known.
Yeah, I've fond memories of finally breaking Andy and making him just declare war on everyone. It's pretty fun in my heart.
Absolutely. Well, that was the Through the Ages app. Good times. Good times.
It's good to hear.
And now I'm going to talk about an economic game that swings so much you wouldn't necessarily consider it part of a Eurogamer's wheelhouse. But you know what? I'm not comfortable with people pigeonholing me into being a Eurogamer, because this is a great, interesting exploration of Cube Rails games called Iberian Rails, just released from Monsoon Publishing. And I did get this from Kickstarter. I participated in the Kickstarter, and I was just so thrilled at how they marketed it. So many Kickstarters are, how much stuff can we throw in this box? How many new, pieces can we trick this out with? And they were like, you know what? Here are the 5 things we did to playtest this. And, they've had over 300 playtest games. And to me, when we were playing this, all the different roles, as I was reading them, felt like they would break the game. So many different pieces feel like they would break the game. But when you play the game, it's like, no, that's just another tool you can use. And if it gets used against you, that's kind of your own fault. Mm-hmm. Anyway, let me tell you how Iberian Rails works. It's different from other Cube Rail games. If you played like Chicago Express, I would consider that like the traditional Cube Rails games. And that might be like the single most iconic Cube Rails games. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but
sure.
Yeah, Chicago. So how it's different from Chicago Express is that it's in kind of akin to Imperial 2030 or an 18xx game, but more like Imperial 2030 because it's much more set. The companies are going to take actions, and whoever is the CEO is going to be the person who takes actions for that company. So it's going to go through them, just like in Imperial 2030. You've got that little thing at the bottom that you always work through. That Russia always goes after Brazil. I don't remember exactly, but the order of the countries is fixed, just like the orders of the trains are in this game, the train companies. Every train company one share is auctioned off in turn order, in the order that they are going to later on act. And then before you actually start playing the game, after you've all got CEOs of every company, now you all have to pick a role. And this role is going to be one of either 8 or 9 roles, depending on how many players you're playing, maybe less than that if you have lower player counts. But these roles are going to determine 3 very important pieces of information. First of all, how much is it going to cost you to build track? Track in this game is not so much tied to the map as it is tied to your player power. So building 5 rails with the engineer is quite efficient. But building 5 rails with something else might cost you $30-40 more. And this is one of those games that has that brittleness of a dollar. The single dollar can be the difference between you being able to build track and not. Other information is whether or not you can do an auction, and if you can start an auction for a share, whether or not it's going to be open or closed. Open auctions are just like regular auctions you'd expect. We all bid in circle, company gets paid. However, closed auctions are closed fist auctions. Think like modern art, except in a closed fist auction, it's actually the player who started the auction that gets paid for it. And then after that, every time an auction happens for a share in a company, that company immediately pays out. So that is something new to wrap your head around. It's not like that in Cube Rails games. Usually Cube Rails games, the players are taking actions. The specific time that companies pay out is tied to how many actions of a certain type the players have taken in a round. And here, it's much more dependent on what specific choices the actual CEO of the company makes. So there's one more bit of information contained on each role, and that is a potential special ability. Something like letting you take control of other companies. Something like you being the inspector who skims off the top of every closed auction, all those backdoors auctions. Something like the Ghost, which lets you avoid the penalty for being the second person to build in a spot. Something like the Hotelier, which is really tied to the mechanics of the game, where you're able to build a hotel on an empty spot. Later on, if you connect a railway there, you get paid for how many tourist cities that railway is already connected to. So it makes this really interesting dynamic that players are going to choose certain roles and then try to set themselves up for, sending their huge railway that has 5 tourist cities hooked up to it into a hotel, getting them $50. That's huge. Anyway, you'll keep on doing this until the normal, I would say a fairly standard Cube Rails game ending, which is that there's a certain amount of companies without stock, or a certain company becomes like epically powerful and reaches the bottom of the payout track. You'll then do a double payout and then count up your money. And in a lot of ways, this reminds me of Indonesia. You know how in Indonesia, like in the last round, your last operating round, you double everybody's money? That's kind of what it feels like here in Iberian Rails. There's other things that even show more of a bit of a lineage with Indonesia. There was a stretch goal that added a merger attorney. Literally, you can roll one train company into another. These are things you don't see in Cube Rails. Like, you don't see this type of interaction between players, between the powers, between, the way that you're able to take control of another player's company. There's a lot of things that I'm not used to seeing in Cube Rails, and there are these explorations as a result of these player powers that are in the game. And it just has me consistently wanting to explore new possibilities. There's extra replayability just in that base box. There was an extra amount of roles. One of the roles I showed Trent was the surrealist painter Salvador Dali. He makes your companies that you operate, every time they pay out, they count empty squares as double cities and cities as nothing. So, like, totally flip the game upside down. Cole Wehrle style.
Well, I mean, it sounds. I was recently had a chance to play German Railways, or Push Ostbahn, Winsum, which that game has a similar feeling where there's there is a strangeness to it that it feels like Chicago Express's Evil Twin, and this seems even more banana. So I'm very intrigued. This was a little off my radar, and it has come recently back on it because the Winsome set this year had a game called Iberian Railways, which I misremember as Iberian Rails, and so I often type it in incorrectly. And I've stumbled on this page a couple times. It seems interesting.
Yeah, and I think the thing for I didn't back it originally with Kickstarter because I think I was in that crew that saw like special player powers, and I was just like, I don't know. You didn't trust it, Andy.
You were a doubter.
But after using the player powers, like, they all seem balanced and useful, and balanced in the way like there's not one that's overpowered than another one. It's just, is it overpowered for what you need it to do? If I get that role at the right critical time I've been setting up for, then yeah, it kicks a lot of butt to have it. But if you get a role that you're not really set up to use, then it's like, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love those crazy card combo games like Glory to Rome. I mean, really, like Pax Porfiriana is kind of in the same genre, where you build these like totally killer combos, and then you've lost the game because you weren't really thinking about what you were doing, and you were just like, yeah, it's happened to me in more than one game of Porfiriana.
Trent, Iberian Rails.
I liked it quite a bit. It reminded me a lot of Age of Steam. I kept thinking Age of Steam when I was playing it, because you're putting rails on the board. You can only afford so much. and honestly, the way you selected the variable player powers reminded me a lot of how the Age of Steam role selection worked in a lot of ways. I mean, it's obviously not the same game, but that was the feeling I came away from it. It's similar to how I felt about Age of Steam very much.
Mhm.
I recognize that the companies are different. The company feels more like an 18xx, how like 6 companies are operated by whoever's the president, and you buy shares on them for scoring. But I felt very much like you needed to get an income engine going. It's just this one felt a little more opaque than Age of Steam to me in terms of how you get the income engine going. But that has a lot to do with which abilities are available, and also has a lot to do with experience, I think. I think playing it a few times would make it more clear. I very much want to play this again. I quite enjoyed it. I think if I'm sitting here and I'm comparing this to Age of Steam, that probably meant I liked it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. I want to play it again.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that was Iberian Rails, and now for what we've all been waiting for, Cole. What an enigma in the board gaming! You kind of like hit you. I don't know. You like cold cocked me with Pax Pamir.
I can't hear when she's talking.
Can you? Hello. It looks like my mic's on.
Check.
Check.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I think Cole might be having audio issues. I think we can all hear each other, but he can't.
Can you hear me, Trent? You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Andy?
I can hear you, Joe.
I can hear you, Cole. I can hear you right now. These types of things happen. Thanks, all of our live viewers. It's great to see you there. Kyle, it's awesome to see you from Dual Gauge, and I hope that Iberian Rails, I hope I'm steering you in the right direction there. And yeah, definitely Forex looks really interesting. I think, let's see, it looks like Cole's back. And can you hear us now, Cole?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you the whole time.
Okay.
So
yeah. Sorry.
it was just
right when you started talking, it bonked down on me. So
it helps if you plug in your headphones.
Yeah. I don't know what happened.
Now, Cole, you really just hit me. You cold cocked me with Pax Pamir. I mean, I had no idea going into that game that I was going to come out of that just thinking like, holy crap! Like this right here is just, it's like a spinning so many different. It's like trying to pinpoint all the atoms swirling around. You know, like a I don't know. Like I don't know science well enough. I think all the atoms and quarks swarming around a nucleus, whatever it is. Anyway, neutrons and protons, that thing. So anyway, that was how I felt when I played Pax Pamir for the first time, and that was the first design of yours that I ever played. But your history in gaming doesn't start precisely with Pax Pamir, does it?
Well, I mean, sort of. I'd been doing variants for a really long time, and other little designs that like never quite worked. Pamir was the first one that I saw through, though. And it was saw through mostly because I had a group of people who kept bothering me to finish it, and then I had time and space to finish it. I mean, it was almost a little bit of an accident. Yeah, but I'd been tinkering with designs as long as I've been playing games, and I think this is something I've heard whenever I'm at cons and I'm talking to other people who design. There's always a point where talking about designs and working on design is as fun or more fun than playing. And that's usually like the bad side. That means like you're going over to this other place where you'd rather be taking things apart than building them out, you know, in a similar way. And that definitely happened with Pamir. Pamir had been a game I had been thinking about for a while. I mean, really, I had been working on designs, but I hadn't found a place where I felt comfortable working until I started playing Phil Eklund's games, and they had a sensibility that I felt no other games in the field had. There's something brash and there's something brash about them, and there is an ambition in what they're trying to tackle and what they're trying to do, and I was very compelled by that. And after I started playing his games, I started thinking about my own projects in Phil's world, And then
Huh.
suddenly they started kind of becoming games.
So where did you get started gaming then? If it was, finally with that Phil Eklund that spoke so true to you.
Well, I mean, I started I think a lot of people come to this hobby in their 20s, and I started like really young. Like I played Catan in elementary school, like on an old German copy. um, and then my uncle gave me like a big stack of old Avalon Hill war games. And so in middle school, I remember pretending to play like squad leader and tactics too. I mean, we were just making up rules. We had ideas of how the game worked.
You were designing games.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we were fibbing to each other. And then I remember very clearly, like right when Battle Cry came out, which was the first of the commercially available Richard board games. So the Command and Colors games, Memoir, that started with Battle Cry, and I had been dabbling in like Warhammer and miniatures games, but as soon as Battle Cry came out, that game was so much better than Warhammer, and it was only like $40, and
Yeah.
and only one person needed to buy it. So we were just playing the hell out of Battle Cry. And then I had a friend whose grandfather played board games. And so like right when Puerto Rico came out, like what was the new big game that year. And, by that year, I mean like 2001, 2002, like Puerto Rico came out, he would get it for Christmas, and then we would find ourselves playing it. And so, I mean, really, all through high school, I was playing like Twilight Imperium, the second edition. And really just like, I was going pretty deep. And I got lucky because I think I was getting really into the hobby when it was easy to find a lot of things. And the first, I remember I had a big moment right at the end of high school. I like found out who Martin Wallace was. And so like I got my copy of Age of Steam like 2005. And that was a moment when Age of Steam was starting to become hard to find, but there were tons of people producing maps. It was like right at the heyday of the expansions. And so like Martin Wallace for me was really formative because I felt like he was tackling war game subjects with a kind of like Euro sensibility. All the things that he got praised for. And so, in college, I like subscribed. I would save my little pennies and subscribe to the Tree Frog games when those were coming out. And I had a really great group in college where we would play, like just about every Sunday, we'd like break out the Martin Wallace games and play them.
Nice. Do you ever try Byzantium?
Yes, I think Byzantium. I think his like canon has really weird holes that people don't talk about. One of them is Byzantium, which is a super strange Euro. It's an engine build or cute. Byzantium, the only other game that he's ever made like Byzantium is like ships. Just in like
I did hear that.
Yeah, there's this weird, both games are about managing like cube flow. But it was nice because I've been lucky to always have like a pretty good group, and so it was very easy to get games played. And they were willing to play games many times. So I remember like when God's Playground came out, I played that a bunch. Regrettably, like these were all things that got played a bunch and then sold to buy more games. Why did I give away God's? Oh, God's Playground is a game I have really mixed feelings about. Because I was very surprised to find it become so popular because I think it is like just a tricky thing. So yeah, I have been playing games for a long time and thinking about them, and then things changed a little bit when I went to graduate school. So after I finished my undergrad, I worked for a little bit and then kind of stumbled into grad school in Austin. And Austin was a much bigger city than I'd been living in. And so my first year in Austin, I could just play Advanced Squad Leader and 1830 and not have to make any new game friends because there were people playing those games. The city was just big enough.
Yeah.
So I'd like go to like the ASL, the Squad Leader like meetups, and then I'd go play the 18xx games. I realized sometime during that first year that I was no longer playing anything current, and I was no longer like hanging out with people my own age. And I kind of like felt like a little bit of desire, like, okay, I should probably reconnect. And part of that reconnecting is something I've said before. I went to this game store, sadly no longer there, called Great Hall Games, and they had all of these Phil Eklund games, and there was a big Phil Eklund community there. And they were playing other kinds of current games. I mean, they were playing games all over the place, but everybody there seemed to have really excellent taste, and they were playing weird things. And it just really opened up my mind to different kinds of designs. So it's been, I think that for some design, when I talk to other folks who do design, for some people, some of the designers I meet play very, very few games. It's kind of remarkable. Like, I mean, I've talked on lots of panels about game design, and I'm always surprised by the number of designers who play just a few games. And they start designing like kind of right away. And for me, it's the opposite. I played a lot of games before I started designing them. And usually when I start working on a project, the first thing I do is I like make a bibliography. And I play like every game I could possibly play on the subject. Oh, I cannot hear you again.
Oh, that one's on me. That was on
me.
me. That was my fault.
Okay, good.
Approach it like you would your grad work is what I said.
Oh, yes, that is absolutely right. Like I can't shake that. And also, like, I had an undergrad professor who, she would often tell me that originality was a bourgeois conceit, and that you're never really original. Sometimes you just don't source yourself well, and you should never be afraid of copying people. And so I've always taken that to heart. Like, if I'm working on a game and I find someone else has done it better, like that's a very good discovery.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why I really, the thing that drove me at PAX Premiere is I felt like if I didn't do it, nobody else was going to make a game on 1820s Afghanistan. And I was just really bothered by that.
Well, I feel like it could, with the way that you handled that situation, like when I played your game there, Cole, like PAX Premiere, I felt like I was not only informed of the situation, but also like sucked into this just black hole in which I couldn't figure out what existed and what didn't. Whether or not I actually had an entity, like a role in the game, or if I was just melting away and becoming the sum of my tableau that was built up.
That's very kind.
Yeah, actually, I figured those would be compliments to you. Yeah, to like the designer of Ticket to Ride, they would be like, "Oh, so you hated it?" But no, for you understand, man. The designs that you're making, are intended.
That loss, that like loss of perspective. It's not a loss of perspective. It's just like becoming. It's really, I mean, what it is just immersion, but immersion's a really tricky thing in board games because of the way like flow works. And I get, Premiere is interesting because I'll talk to people who don't find it thematic. I don't mean that as like it's a knock. They just, it doesn't strike them as being specifically about a place because the place is so alien. Right? So it becomes like kind of generic because they're not familiar with it. And then I was playing this guy named Andy Mesa, who's based in Portland, and I was talking to him at BGGCon a couple years ago, and he said he played a game where, I'm pretty sure Andy was the one who told me, that like whenever they played a card, they would read the flavor text. And that it changed that game and then every game they played afterwards because they realized they were like kind of participating in a story. One of the reasons why, I mean, on the flavor text, one of my regrets about John Company is for lots of reasons, like there is no flavor text really. The game doesn't need it. It's very thematic, but I had all this flavor text. Like I never edited it, and it never ended up getting used in the game.
Well, if you could make that available as like some sort of like, you know what that sounds like to me, Cole? That sounds like separate thematic rule book, yes. The book that they put out for GMT, like, or any other. Matt Gertz even does it with his games, the thematic notes.
Yeah, with John Company is a special case because, so one of the crazy things about Phil, and I mean this like in the best way, is that his business model is always like very weird. And in the case of Sierra Madre, it like so much, I don't think this is appreciated as much as it should be. His business model is entirely built around German postage fees.
Yeah, no, I've heard this at like the size of the box.
Yeah, it's like right at the center of everything. And you know, because it's built around the idea that you can ship some, if it's under a kilogram, it goes anywhere in the world for €5. And John Company is like 0.99. And we were completely relieved because I almost asked for 4 extra pages of rules, which would have pushed us over. But it like did come down to like 4 pieces of paper, or 2 pieces folded.
Wow.
Yeah, we were right. Or, I guess 1 piece folded, but it was right. It was right on the edge. Yeah, there's a lot of John Company adjacent stuff that I really want to do. Depends if I will find time to do it. Because that game, John Company has a weird problem that Premier doesn't, which is in Premier, the things that happen are explained by the actions of the players. So like if you assassinate somebody, that's literally the thing that you did in Premier. It's like literally the action you took.
Yeah, it's an action you take.
With John Company, it has a check system. So you'll do a check and it will succeed or fail. And the pressures on that check are all very thematic, but they are not explicated by the rules. So players who know the history will be able to fill it in very easily. And other players who don't know the history but can imagine things will fill it in perhaps incorrectly. But for some players, they may find it like somewhat arbitrary. And if I would have had like bigger cards, I could have just like written like, oh, this little thing, this is actually what's happening here. And there's a reasonable chance of it.
Interesting. So do you guys have any questions, Andy, Trent, about like sort of the, I guess, up until pre-August here? Because we still kind of stayed in your designs pre-August.
Yes.
Trent?
Fire away.
I don't know what you're asking, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have any questions about, well, I guess so we're talking about like Premier and before?
Yeah, for Pax Pamir, for anything like history of gaming, maybe Trent and you could kind of whip it out and measure here and see who's got the longest history in gaming.
There it is. When did you join BGG, Trent?
I don't know. It was early 2000s. I know it was.
Okay.
I used to participate in the old news group that was pretty popular before then, Rec Games Board.
Okay, I see. I wasn't on that. BGG for me was 2003.
Yeah, I probably joined around then when people really started migrating out of the news group. It's kind of started dying.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing games since I was a little kid. I got hooked by Acquire, so
yes, that Acquire was likewise like a very important game for me.
Yeah, that
was a garage sale buy for me.
Acquire.
Yeah,
a garage sale buy? Woo.
Yeah, I stumbled on. I didn't know what it was. I just was like, oh, here's a game. And then it played so well. And so I started, and then when I went to garage sales, I would like look for old 3M games. But of course, none of them is like even half as good as Acquire.
No. Man, it's just Acquire. Was it the blue box? The blue box that had like
it's the guy like thinking, and there's like the little.
Yeah. It looks almost like it belongs on the cover of like Atlas Shrugged or.
Yes, yeah. There's a little Randian thing to it. And like on the back, it's like, the way those 3Ms work is like, it's like a very classy, like office setting. Playing a game of Acquire.
I did kind of one question too. I was thinking about, so with the new job that you have, will you still be able to do some of those historic games like John Company and release them with other companies like Sierra Madre or Hollandspiel and things?
Yeah. So short answer is yes, totally. I have a lot of freedom. So the way. Right now, the job is and we can talk about this later, is in kind of like a tricky spot because I'm very, very, very busy getting a game ready. But when things become more normal, like I will have time in my schedule to work on other projects. And the kind of gentleman's agreement I have with Patrick, leader, the owner, is that if I do something that is off-brand, like take it somewhere else. Because if it allows me to explore a different design space, that's going to be helping my work anyway. But if it's even like a little bit in brand, he'd want to see it first, and I'd be happy to show it to him. So for instance, I have I have like a really weird. So when I found out that I might be moving to Minnesota, like the first thing I did was run to the library and get all these books on the history of Minnesota, which is has like a really interesting state history. It's totally compelling. So I started, I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but one of the things that I do in my design practice is I oftentimes will design games around subjects that I'm learning. So like Pamir, I was doing my notes. I was like working on a project relating to Afghanistan, and I just started designing a little model and kind of thinking about it. And it was just like my way of teaching it to myself. And then the reason I often don't mention it is because that thing looks nothing like Pax Pamir. And then Pamir grew out of a concerted effort. But I very often will like trick myself into learning about a subject by like playing games about it. And then, so this has less to do with my even design practice and more just like playing games. So if I want like that, I had a period when I was an undergrad where I really wanted to learn about Napoleon because I didn't know anything. And so I like got a copy of McLaughlin's The Napoleonic Wars, which is a fabulous war game. And then also like David Chandler's The Campaigns of Napoleon, and just like learn them both at the same time. And I find it a useful kind of like self-pedagogy thing. Anyway, I started learning about the history of Minnesota, and then thought, oh God, there's like 3 games here. Really crazy, weird, closed economy, economic games here. More like Infamous Traffic than other things. And so those are Hollandspiel projects. But because Leader Games is based in Minnesota, I would probably ask Patrick if he wanted to do anything with them first. He probably won't, and I'll probably toss him with Tom and Mary. But that's like in a year or two when I have time to really get them in shape. But in general, Andy, to answer your question, is like I have a lot of freedom to keep doing other projects, and I've got a big backlog of projects. So when we were negotiating for this job, I wanted to make sure that I had time to keep working on other things. And this job is definitely going to allow me to do that.
Yeah, that's cool, because I was a little concerned about that, because I know other interviews I've listened to where like some people who sign with a company, the company's like, we own all your ideas.
Yeah, well, and for the projects that I work on, like the project I'm working on right now for them is they own it. Like it's their,
right.
I'm sure like we'll negotiate a contract. I'll get some royalty of it, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not even too concerned about that. But like this was a project that he has paid me to develop the design of, and like the design was initially mine, but it was in brand for them, and I have no qualms with that. But I've been very careful to retain ownership of everything I've ever published. So like I own Premiere and Traffic and John Company, and the reason I do that is because I'm sensitive to the history of designs, like the intellectual property getting into troubled waters.
Yeah.
If the designer isn't explicit about that ownership. And so if ever I wanted to like take John Company elsewhere from Phil, I'm not sure why I would do that, but I mean, there are some reasons why I might do that. I could pull that out. And for the projects that I work on outside of the company, I'll be able to do that. I think one of the sad things about Martin Wallace is that he kind of stopped doing like really interesting designs. I mean, he does like, I don't know, this feels a little unfair because I love the second edition of Study in Emerald. I think it's fabulous. And I think it gets a lot of crap, and it should.
Second edition, did you ever play the first one?
Yes, I have played the first one a lot. I think the second one is amazing.
I love the second one. I don't have any experience with the first one, so people usually
the first one is a nightmare. People love the first one, and I don't mean that in a good way either. People love the first one, I think, because it is expensive. And also, well, because there's a cachet to having it. The first one has a lot of overhead, which can lead to thematic moments, but those moments just take away from the tension of the game. And the second edition is so beautifully tooled and so tense, which is
why
why
I feel, yeah.
I think that's what I think it came out like last year or something. I love it. And so Wallace's redos, I think I might even prefer Age of Industry to Brass, which is also like Heresy.
Please don't say it. Don't go there.
No, it's complicated because
You're okay on Age of Industry, but I'm just worried about where you're going to go now.
well, no, but I'm not going to say a damn word about Steam, which is terrible.
Okay, thank goodness. Oh boy.
Because it took the strategic horizon of Age of Steam and just threw it in the trash.
Yeah.
And so all that you have left is this kind of like silly. It's not silly. It's just it's trivial. It's like a bunch of like little tactical exercises. I feel like it is like a Age of Steam like workbook. And so you can like sit and do some Steam, but I don't. And what the thing that really bothers me is like Steam and Railways of the World did such. Oh, here, one second. What are you looking for, Katie? Okay, your phone's on the table. So Steam and Railways of the World really fractured the Age of Steam community. At least from my view, it seemed like before those games existed, the community was a lot stronger. This could be a perspective problem that it might be they were bringing in people who had never played it, but
yeah.
I'm always hesitant about it, and when I was working on the expansion to Premiere, and I started thinking about like, oh, I wonder if someday Premiere will get a second edition. There are all these little things I want to do, and I've kind of decided not to do any of them because I'd rather keep the game largely the same and not not have that that kind of problem. So I think Wallace is tricky because sometimes his redevelopments are very smart and other times they are not. But I think in his move to try to make his job a full-time gig doing design, he abandoned like the base of supporters that had got him there. And again, this could be an unfair read. I don't mean to disperse him at all, but I was sensitive to that when I was talking to Patrick about this job because I wanted to feel free to keep doing weird things that were off kilter. At the same time, like this, Leader Games, it's a different audience from the one that I wanted. I think one of the things that I really liked about talking to Patrick about this job was that I kind of wanted access to his audience. And it's really been a really wonderful working relationship because we both have things that we want from the other one and we've been getting along. And I also as much as I like doing my own designs, I think that the future of the hobby is in focused in-house designs from small firms. I think you'll see more Hollandspiels as print on demand becomes like cheaper and the quality gets better. And I sort of like I would want to put my efforts with a team of 5 or a team of 6.
Sure.
That was working really hard to make 3 games a year, as opposed to the freelance designer model, which I have been kind of operating under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you just like more people are able to see more angles of it, and to still have the designer involved in that process is really important. I would say sometimes you see the too many cooks in the kitchen issue, like that game Cry Havoc that was just released. But I think that for the most part, that came as a result of the designer kind of answering incorrectly to rules questions on the game page because he'd kind of like, the development had happened, on the other side of the ocean, and that got released. But I mean, like you said, you're talking about an in-house design where the designer is still project lead, still very much involved with it, but you're able to see lots of different angles, and I think the game becomes better as a result of that.
One of the things that most impressed me about Patrick was after Vast was such a success for him, or during that process, he hired the artist full time and kind of made a choice to staff up and to make a real go of it as a little company, which is different from Phil. Like for Phil, this is his job, but he's also retired, and he relies a lot on volunteer work. And I think that John Company, for instance, like could have probably been like a more expensive game and like a bigger, like I just think it would have been a thing that he could have sold and done well, but it would have required him scaling up his operation. And he is very happy with his audience and the size of his operation. And as I was thinking about the possibility of working in the industry, I wanted to go to a firm that was really looking for growth. Because I feel like the hobby is exploding, and I would just feel more comfortable with people who were more ambitious with respect to what their audience could be. And again, that's nothing on Phil, because he's built like the best audience in the world.
Oh, yeah.
I just felt like I understood it, and I wanted to try out a different group.
Right.
Well, I mean, what Patrick has definitely done to gain my attention, because I've played Vast, and a lot of my friends have played Vast, and I had actually, I've heard this comment from two guys within our game group, and now we lean towards the heavy games, Cole. That's one of the reasons that we sought you out to be on this podcast. But what really interests me specifically about Vast with our experiences is that a lot of the friends I have are critical of Vast as a continued gaming experience, but very happy with the way that it explores mechanically some things. You had mentioned, and I'm not sure if I'm asking a question here that you're not able to disclose, so tell me full on if I'm going into territory here that you'd rather not talk about, but like that specifically with your interview with Patrick, like you almost sold me on Patrick just when you said how Patrick asked you specifically to talk about Vast in your interview.
Right. So he asked me to talk about Vast, and I offered a critique of the game because I love Vast, but I also there are things about the design. It's a fabulous game, but it also is. So my feeling about Vast. Let me back it up. I think it's a bit of a development marvel because it is so finely developed that it is incredibly balanced and interesting. Almost no matter how much you abuse it. But it also has a lot of design baggage to it. I mean, it's just a weird thing where I find it to this day like hard to teach.
Oh yeah, for sure, dude. It's really hard to teach. Everybody.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's playing a different game, and that difficulty was also its hook. So it's tricky because I certainly don't mean to take people away from it, because I do think that. I mean, I've taught Vast now like dozens of times at Gen Con and just at other places where I've shown it, and so I've got it down like to a pretty good teach. But when I interviewed, I offered a critique of the design about the things that I would have changed, the parts I felt were weak, the parts I felt were strong, and he was so receptive to that comments, and actually in helping work a little bit on the sequel that he's working on. Which is just really good and shows, Patrick. So the original designer, David Somerville, and Patrick was kind of like co-designer, developer. Vast 2, which Patrick has had a lot more control over, shows like you can see someone who's like really learning and really understanding what worked about the first game and then capitalizing on it. And that kind of reflexiveness about your own work seemed like exactly the kind of person that I wouldn't mind like throwing my lot with, because I love Premiere, but I also think that like there were issues with Premiere that I like corrected with the expansion and that I've corrected with subsequent games, in the way that I'm going to have problems with any design I'm working on.
Sure. Yeah. Always improve for sure. Nothing is ever perfect. I think that's. Yeah, that really gets at the core of like why I'm really interested now to see what specifically is going to be coming from Leader Games. So we're going to save that for our hype section. Sure. Cole, is there anything specific else that you'd like to add about your current situation? Oh, I did want a little bit of advice. A friend of mine from Wisconsin says you made a statement earlier about it reminded me of this comment, which is, is your first time living in Minnesota, correct?
Correct.
There's no such thing as cold weather. There's only inappropriate clothing.
I will take.
Make sure you go to Duluth Trading, man. Go get out there to Cabela's, Duluth Trading, and buy yourself some flannel.
Yeah. No, I've been hitting up the yard sales pretty heavily and like stocking up my winter wardrobe. We
Together
had
with the 3M games that you're still seeking out?
Yes, of course. Well, some habits die hard. We, when we lived in Austin, we had a hope chest that was just like stashed full of all our winter gear. And about once a year, it'd be like maybe 55 degrees. And everybody would break out all their most, like they'd be resplendent in winter wear. And they were just cosplaying winter. Because you felt like you should do it at least once a year. But I'm so excited to actually like to break it out. Yeah, I mean, my wife and I and our kids, like we just totally love this place. It's wonderful. And I've come on to Leader Games at a time when we're moving very fast and we're working on like a new project that's just, it is as hard right now as it feels like it could ever be. And I'm just completely in love with it. Doing this work full time is fabulous. And anybody who's got a design inkling, like if this is the prize, I assure you, like it is something like worth fighting for because it is wonderful. And especially for a company like, the Leader Games is just a wonderful ethos and an interest in producing like really excellent, strange games. And I hope there are a dozen more companies like it. Like it's kind of singular in its own way. And, Vast, for some of its warts, is truly just wonderful. And also rewards play and study in a way that few games, because that's the other thing, right? Like sometimes I feel like I can accidentally knock Vast a little bit. And I don't mean to, because dungeon crawlers, by and large, I find is like a pretty terrible corner of the gaming industry.
Yeah, they're not really focused on design.
Vast is so exceptional in that space.
Yeah, exactly. It is one of the first to really push outside of that. I think that we're starting to see game design start getting, working its way into these industries. I think that Martin Wallace was doing the same sort of thing, sort of into, not to knock Avalon Hill wargaming, and just wargaming in general, but like adding some of the, like you said, Euro sensibilities. And maybe they're not necessarily war games, like a lot of your war gamers will criticize those designs and say they're not technically war games because, because this, this is not specifically tied to a battle mechanism. This is something that's just for the sake of the design. And I would counter that there's at least something in every game that you can point at that's like, well, everything is abstracted to some point, unless we're both going to go grab our pistols and go outside.
Right. I often say that like Struggle of Empires is the best game on the 18th century ever made. And it is that's a Martin Wallace game. And it's a very high level strategic game about the 18th century where you'll get none of the historical specificity of a war game, but it captures the tensions like perfectly.
Really, really cool. So, anything you had to add to that, Trent? Anything you wanted to before I open it up to? We had a viewer question here that I wanted to ask. Anything to say, Trent?
Nope. Jump right to the viewer question.
I actually had one more too, if I could.
Oh, go ahead, Andy. Sorry. Close you out, dude.
Okay. The thing I've been curious about for a while, actually, kind of following your work with Pammy or Infamous Traffic and John Company, is working with Hollandspiel and Sierra Madre. They often have like restrictions on what you can do in the sense of you only get this many components, figure it out. Does working under those constraints, do you enjoy that more than if someone would just go like, do whatever you want, we'll figure out,
Yeah,
more closed or open?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, so with Infamous Traffic, it was the production constraint that allowed that game to exist. Like I was having such trouble designing an Opium Wars game. And then as soon as Tom offered the job to me and said, okay, you kind of only have 178 pieces. And then I just sort of divided them like, all right, so 5 players, 20 a piece, that's 100. And, so you just kind of like book it. And then I guess like I only have 3 weeks. And so I just kind of like worked it. It felt like working a math problem backwards a little bit. And it really helped me like focus. With Pamir, it was useful to have the card caps a little bit. John Company is trickier. So John Company, I think more than my other games, it shows the reverse a little bit, because when I first worked on that game, I was going to fit it in a Pamir sized box. And it was only because it had all these extra cubes and things, I could only get away with one deck of cards. So it was going to be a game that was like an order of magnitude more complicated than Premier, but with half as many cards and kind of like no decks. And at the beginning of the process, it was extremely generative because so for instance, I wanted to make an event system and I couldn't figure out how to make an event system with only like 15 cards. Like, because, and then I realized that actually I just hated event decks because so the thing about event decks is like any card can get pulled, or if it's like pandemic, like a selection of cards is going to get pulled. And that's fine, but it means that the variance is so high that you have to make the events kind of like inconsequential.
Yeah. Unless you want players to just be caught off guard and that to become
right.
Everybody's minds.
Yeah, so in a lot of games, I mean, I would say in the vast majority of games that have event decks, and Fantasy Flight is very guilty here, but I mean, I guess not so much anymore, but any game that has an event deck, it feels, they're always silly. And
yeah, I always don't want to play with them.
yeah, you don't want to play with them. He's like, why would you put that tax on the game? But when I would read like the journals of these like officers and the clerks, like the events mattered a lot. And they usually saw them coming and they like changed everything. And so essentially the way the John Company events work is there are these 8 regions, and the regions have different statuses. They have like an economic status, they're prosperous, repressed. They have a political status, like they might be part of empires or sovereign. And then they have a trade status, which is the relationship to the British. And the event system, all it is a number. So it's like a 0, 1, 2, 3, or there's a couple 4s. And that's the number of steps this like big lumbering elephant pawn takes. And so the elephant wanders around India, and whenever it gets to a region, you roll the event dice, and then there's a little table on the region card, which determines the event. But those tables shift depending on the sovereign status. So like if a region conquers another region, that card is physically placed over the other card, and it changes the event table for the conquered region, because regions that have been conquered behave differently than regions that are sovereign. And what this did is it does 2 things. One of them is it allows me to put a huge number of events in the game. There's like 192 or something. Now, originally these were named and had little flavor text blurbs, but the cards are too small, so they're not actually on there. The other thing that it does is you can see what's going to happen, kind of. Like once players get a sense of what's going on, they can look at the elephant and say like, all right, there's a pretty good chance that like Maratha is going to revolt on the first turn. If that happens, we're going to go down this branch of history. But maybe it doesn't happen, in which case this kind of stuff is going to happen. And so you can kind of hedge your bets. And sometimes I will have players like complain because they sent all of their ships to a region that then like burst into like famine and they lost all their fleets. But there was like an 80% chance that was going to happen. Had all the fleets there. And so I'm going to have to write up a teaching script at some point, but I'm just going to tell new players, just play with static India, because you're not good enough yet to understand how to read the elephant. And then once you do, the game really starts coming up. Anyway, so you asked me about production constraints, Andy. I was very happy with the system. We built, my friend and I, Chaz Throko, we built a Python script, and we would like model different Indias. We'd adjust the values and then see how India played out of like a quarter. We'd use like 250,000 game like samples. We could make all sorts of charts to know how the game could turn out, because it has so much more power than a standard event deck that playtesting was never going to tell me if there was a problem. Like we had to come up with a different analytic. But there, by the same token, when I got a box for the game that was bigger, and we decided, my brother was very.
We're talking Pax Ren size now, right? Not Pax.
No. Pax. Yeah. So the box is actually the Pax Porphyrionic Collector's Edition. It's like a big.
Large.
It's a mini coffin. I've got a copy. Yeah, I've got a copy right somewhere. So the my brother, who's a wonderful game developer, and who I will always lean on for advice, was very insistent that we switch from having only cards to a board, because I was essentially asking the players to like just imagine the board and just to hold all that information in their head. And he was very insistent. The game needs a board. You were asking way too much of your players. But I was so stuck in my production limitation that I really pushed against it. And finally, like the chorus of playtesters was just too much. I was like, all right, I'm just going to draw like a joke board. And like, if people want to use it, they can use it. And the first time we played with the board, it was so much easier to play and so much easier to teach. And so the production limitations forced me to come up with interesting systems and new ways of dealing with problems, but they will also lead to huge blind spots. It's one of the nice things about working for Leader is that I have so much more freedom in terms of the shape of the game, because I don't have to do all the graphic design or the art, or I can tell our operations manager like, hey, can you get like a quote if we have cubes, or a quote if we have discs? Or, you know, we were doing something on the game I'm working on now, and today it was like, oh, you know, if we have a special token, it'll be one less calculation. And we were able to just be like, oh, I bet we have room on a punch board for that. So I feel like my training, my kind of design journeyman part with Phil was really helpful in forcing me to not ask for like a unique component. So I have a natural restraint thing. We're not natural, but I've learned restraint thanks to that. But at the same time, like John Company was a lesson in like the dangers of being too restrained.
Sure. It's a really interesting question. Yeah. There's a couple of viewer questions here. One seems like it might be pretty quick, so I'll ask that. And then there's one that might take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole. So first of all, we have a listener who is going to be playing Struggle of Empires and asked what the ideal player count is.
Oh, an odd number. Any odd number, 3, 5, or 7 is ideal. But I actually think that game scales wonderfully. I think it is in the group of games. There's a group of games, including like Civ, where people are like only played at max count and they're crazy. Like Civ, like I mean the old Tresham Civ. Is wonderful with 4 and wonderful with 5, and Struggle of Empires is great at mini counts. I would say with new players, if you have a table of inexperienced players, the lower is the better, because it will get long as people are learning all those tiles. I tend to prefer it with 5 or 7 these days, but only with really experienced players, because you can really hurt yourself, or rather you have room to really like push the system. The last thing I'll say for new Struggle of Empires players is you should, like, you're playing the game well if you're on the verge of revolution. So take out as much money as you can and like really allow yourself to explore that part of the game, because Struggle of Empires has like essentially an infinite money system, and it's great. Yeah, so I'm excited for someone getting ready to play that game.
All right. How about an 18XX question from Kyle, who is of the Dual Gauge podcast, who's here with us now. He asked, would you ever design an 18XX game? And if so, what would you bring new to the genre?
Oh my God. I've met just enough 18XX designers to feel like there's no way I could do it. Only because one, the questions they ask are so much more difficult than the questions I feel like I'm asking, and two, like testing is just really hard. You got like it's because the time commitments are multiplied. The thing I'm working on right now is like a 75-minute game, and it is awesome to be able to like play it 3 times in a row. Can't really do that with 18XX. If I were doing an 18XX, I would.
Where would it be set? Could you do it in Minnesota?
Could I do a Minnesotan 18XX? I don't know enough about. I don't know anything about Minnesotan Rails. I know a lot about Choo Choo Bob's, which is a Minnesotan public access show about trains that my son loves. But I don't think that's good. That's good grist for the 18XX mill. I would want. So my favorite 18XX at the moment, and and by moment I mean like the last 3 years, has been and is like 1860. And I would love to do like a small island 18xx with like lots of little companies that just like explode. I kind of love. I also, my only complaint about, I love 18xx games. I love them, but I almost uniformly dislike like the last hour of play.
Yeah.
I think it's just like a tax that you pay. Like you get on the ride and you're like, the last hour of this ride is kind of boring, but the first 4 hours are going to be exceptional, and you're just going to deal with the boring part. I would want to work on one that had a dynamic end. And I don't really know, like, I don't necessarily even know that's possible. The only one I've played that I feel like really has a dynamic last stage is 1817, where like really amazing things are possible, like right up to the very end. So I don't know. I mean, I think maybe I would want to design a short one, a short island, a little island.
Like a short version of 1817?
Yeah, that's what I want. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel that is well like outside of my weight class. I would love to someday be able to sit down and design them, because I do think that they are as good as it gets in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, almost all my Desert Island games are 18xx titles.
Well, interesting. Yeah, great perspective there. Especially like, I didn't realize how many 18xx games you'd played. I know, like you said, you played a lot of 1830, but you just mentioned like a lot of the big ones. Like 1817 is one that Andy has been, confused by its rule book, and that usually means a good thing for Andy, right?
Yeah.
It has a great rule book.
Now, it took me a while to get it, just because of the way like the privates kind of are used to fund other companies, which can grow up into other companies. Once I got that in my head, I'm like, I see how this works, and then I would probably horribly die in my first game, but it'd be fun.
I'm actually sporting a New York Central mug. I just want to.
Oh,
Always got them on my mind. 1817 has one of the cool things I love about that design is I feel like it's like the whole genre being built from first principles, or like, like the whole private sales, like you can do it for 50% more than list value. Like all those kind of like niggly rules are kind of arbitrary, but because they're enshrined by 1830, you don't really think about them. And in 1817, that kind of stuff will happen, but it happens organically. And I love how the companies, like there are rules for like the mergers and the friendly sales and how the companies grow from little to big. And it's all within like the core logic of the game. Mm-hmm. And so I find that it feels like very organic.
It feels truly different from 1830, and not sort of like designed off of 1830, but more designed off a different core idea.
Yeah.
I've just been told by a few people that if I can ever get a game of it going, we need to sign some kind of contract stating we will all maintain friendships afterward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing I'll say about 17, and I could prattle on and on about the different versions of branches and whatnot, is don't like it doesn't have to be an all-day game. Like just play to the 4s or just play to the 3s. Or not the 3s, like play to the 5s. And treat it like a 2 or 3 or 4 hour game. And then as you get better, you'll get a little faster and you'll want to go deeper into the game. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I did this summer, I played a lot of 18xx this summer, and I just didn't worry about finishing them. I was like, we're going to play 1889. We'll play for 3 hours, and we might get it done. But if we're not, it's okay. We can just kind of ballpark the score. And that strategy really led to a lot more play.
You're like setting a time limit as opposed to we'll finish it based on the rules?
Yes, yeah. Because usually you know who won anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's been my experience, if you're playing a longer one, people get worried about making it for that long.
Yeah.
And it can just really drag.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. All right. Well, I think now it's about right time here. I don't see any other questions unless there's anything. Speak now or forever hold your peace, for we shall be going to hype.
Sweet.
Well, yeah, let's have you here, Cole, since we're talking still about your design school and your philosophy, you know. Let's get more into specifics here.
All right. So you want to hear my hype?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk about the game I'm working on. So this is a game that it's had a long everything I've worked on has long incubation time, and this one's no different. And it's sort of my response to Voco's coin games.
Mm-hmm.
So I love hate lots of games, and most especially the coin games. And the relationship is never like more like hot and then like cool than towards the coin games. I think they're lovely, but I also like. There are things about them that I find very frustrating, and I feel like they're too long. And I've always had these like weird mixed feelings about them. And I say that as someone who's like logged like well over 25 plays a Cuba Libre and has played Andy and Abyss a bunch. So I've been thinking a lot about coin games. I've always wanted to make one, and I've worked on games that are, as you guys know, like kind of about that kind of like taut geopolitical conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Like not necessarily like, outward conflict, like fight, but yeah, the counterinsurgency kind of has these different.
Premier could have been a coin game. That was the way it could have gone. And I have other designs I haven't published that could have been coin games. So somewhere I was listening. So the brief backstory on this is a few years ago. I was listening to the audiobook of The Once and Future King, and you may be familiar with like The Sword and the Stone. Look of it. And there's a scene where like Wart and Merlin are swimming around in the fishes. And in the Disney movie, there's like a scary big fish. But what the Disney movie catches, and I promise this does relate to coin, what the Disney movie skips is that the big fish hypnotizes the little fish with this like terrifying speech about like might and right. And it's actually kind of like about Hobbesian governance in the way that The Once Future King is outstanding and well worth a read, because it has a lot to do with political philosophy. Anyway, when I listened to this, so I was so haunted, and then so he like hypnotized him with this speech, and then he snaps, and my wife and I, we were driving the car, and both of us kind of like jumped because we were so like spellbound by this audio recording. Anyway, and so after that, I was kind of thinking about animal parables. And so I had two separate lines of thought. One of them was about how I really want to make a coin game, and maybe the way for me to make a coin game was for me to make a very simple, like almost family game that would attack some of the design problems of a coin game and some of like the more meaty stuff about like governance. But if I wanted it to do it to a more general audience, I probably couldn't theme it around like 1820s Afghanistan.
Yeah.
and when I was listening to this audiobook, I felt like, oh, what if I like maybe it's an animal parable or something like that. So I started working on this design, and it was just like for a long time called like Light Coin Game.
Coin Game.
and it, you know, it kind of went through different incarnations, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And then while I was working, you know, so this job, the job at Leader Games, there's a funny story that went into it that I won't go into now that led to everything. But there was a point where he asked me if I had things I was working on. And I was like, you know, I've got this game, like not a lot of things I have would be good for your brand. But I do have this weird light coin game. And Vast oftentimes gets compared to a coin game.
Yeah.
Because the fact it plays so differently. And he looked at it and he was like, oh, I definitely want this game. I don't know when we're going to do it, but like this could be a good thing. And so I was like, all right, that's fine. Like I'm in no hurry. I think sometimes in design you can like really put your heart into something and you like want to see it happen post haste. And
yeah,
I've got too many things on my plate. Like if someone wants to delay it on my projects leader, that's fine. So anyway, he some things happened and suddenly there was a production slot open, and he came to me and was like, do you think you could get your game ready for like a soon production slot? So I can give you guys the short pitch for it. We're going to officially announce everything later this week. But the game is called Root, and it is a light coin game, like drawn beautifully by Kyle Farron, the same artist from Vast.
Yeah.
And it is set in a kind of Redwall-esque, like, animal forest. But make no mistake, like, it's a coin game. And it is, it's 75 minutes. So, and your first game will be about 90 or a little bit more, but then it settles right down into that like hour to 75-minute range. And the setting of the game is it starts where this kingdom is just like totally conquered this big woods, and they've deposed like the woods' natural rulers. And the game is about the erosion of that power. And so the factions are, you have like that new militaristic kingdom that's trying to like build economic infrastructure. You have, and I love this podcast because it allows me to describe it in the terms that I imagined it, because obviously with the art and with the audience, there are other ways of describing this game. But essentially one of the players is kind of playing a logistical game. One of the players is playing a little bit of kind of a Netrunner style agenda egalitarian revolution game that's happening underneath it. You have the former rulers who work very differently than, like, they have a different imperial model, and they behave differently, and they're kind of coming into that. And you have a variety of interlopers. You have like you have a merchant, and there are kind of mercenaries, and there are other different factions. All the factions are fully asymmetric, but unlike Vast, the game is sort of my reaction to both Vast and to coin games, so that it's built to be very easily taught, and there's a lot more commonality between the roles than Vast. So it tends to play a lot faster. But there is nothing else like it. It is super strange. And
dude, that sounds, holy crap. Like,
yeah.
Trent, what do you think hearing all this?
I'm very, 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 very interested. I'm like, and
it's set in like Redwall, so you'll be able. This will be Trent's game
Yeah.
that he gets like his like 9-year-old son to play.
Oh yeah, no, and it this is the game I want to play with my parents. I want to play with my, I want like that game that I can, it's always tricky because I'm like, oh yeah, I do game design. I'm like, well, let's play a game you've made. I'm like, you really don't want to.
I guess I don't know how much you can talk about this. Will this be like kickstarted or?
Yeah, so our plan is, the details will be announced later this week, but like we're going to take it to Kickstarter, and then we're kind of hoping for an Origins release. The design is pretty far along, and boy, let me tell you, it is so wonderful to be able to work on a project full time, because it just allows me to move at a speed I haven't been able to move before. So it's getting tons of testing. We're really working on like kicking the tires now, making sure everything's fine. But if you're interested, follow me on Twitter, or the artist who is, he's at like D20 plus modifier. If you just search Kyle Farron, you'll find him. He's been posting art from the game. It's going to be so pretty. It's going to be like incredibly, incredibly gorgeous. Right now I'm doing some of the graphic design. I imagine they'll kick me off the project and find someone who is more professional than I am. But it's just been lovely to be like, to talk to the artist and be like, hey, I kind of need you to do this thing. And then he draws it for me, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. I'm just so taken with it. But yeah, so I think the official announcement comes out later this week, and then there will be a Kickstarter and all the things associated with it. But it's going to be just a real blast. And I think, everyone I know who I talked about coin games, they love that genre, but they take a long time to play. And this is not a long game. But
will this potentially be the first in a series from you?
Yeah, there are other games associated with it, and we have big plans for this particular, like this. So there are two things. One, the world that is being introduced here is hopefully going to be a property that Leader Games explores, depending on how well this game does. And secondly, the engine that I've built for this game is totally different from the coin engine. It feels coinish, but it shares no mechanism.
Uh-huh.
And people could port it for other games. And I kind of want to play in the space more anyway.
It sounds like you might colloquially refer to it as mice and politistics.
that might get stolen. We'll see. I'm not running the ad campaign, so someone else will have to stop it. I just recommend, like, if you just look at my Twitter, I've been posting pictures from our playtests, and they have been, I love my playtesters, and I have good relations with them, but usually the products I work on, you play once and you're like, okay, let's take a little break. and I love the games, but I rarely do double headers of like John Kemp or something. This has been a game that people want to play again like the moment it's done.
Ooh, that's
that's
a pretty good sign.
Yeah, that is a good sign. It's not something I'm accustomed to.
Oops.
Oops. I just recommend checking it out.
Well, that sounds really great, dude. I don't know how we're going to follow up that hype, but we're going to try to. Well, we'll force Trent to with his the collectible card game in his favorite franchise.
No, I'm just going to hype Root.
But Trent, you were obligated to hype the Munchkin collectible card game.
Okay, so I'm not going to hype the Munchkin collectible card game. I'm pretty excited about Root. I was just going to mildly hype Noria, which is coming out from Stronghold Games. It's a game that is about... the thing that intrigues me about it is it seems to be a rondelle builder. So,
rondelle builder.
Yeah.
Ooh,
like Great Western Trail sounds.
Yeah, the game
that's how I
seems to have
describe
a three-piece rondelle, and people are essentially assembling it and putting it together throughout the game. And then pieces move around it in some fashion that change your moves. So you're going to build a unique rondelle during the game, and it's going to control all your actions.
Okay.
So that's enough for me to want to try it and see what's going on there, because that sounds fascinating to me.
Yeah,
so,
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Noria. It's coming out from Stronghold Games early next year. It's a new designer who won like a design award, you have interesting ideas, now let's develop them award from the Spiel des Jahres a few years ago.
Okay, cool.
And this is what she's been working on.
That's awesome.
I'm intrigued. It's like a 2-hour game. It's not like really light. It's not, epically super forever heavy, but it's a 2-hour game. So
okay, that's
I'm intrigued to see what this is. The idea of a rondelle builder seems fascinating to me. So
certainly, yeah. No, I'm super interested in that too. Well, also from Stronghold Games is the expansion that I'm going to hype. It's a pretty brief hype as well because it's not that big of a game. But I thought Not Alone was a really cool little exploration in hidden movement games. I think that it was one that kind of knew it was a small, very much a filler game. And one of the things that I thought when playing it was this would be really interesting if I could just play a little bit more. It felt like everything was really, really much tied to playing cards and picking them up. And there wasn't much things being explored that way. The main variance in the game, the main variety and variability came from like the random decks that you sort of drew and got special abilities from. But I think that having different choices as to what you use for different locations in the game, Not Alone, in its expansion, Not Alone Exploration, will maybe add a little bit of legs to a game that I thought was a really cool sort of mini Alien experience for those of you that liked something on par with like Nuns on the Run or Letters from Whitechapel, but would like to see that sort of hidden movement done without necessarily the need for a board. So
that sounds fabulous. Have you played oh god, what is that Osprey game? I'm gonna just like totally like Escape from the Aliens in Outer Space. Is that what it's called?
Oh, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. I strongly recommend playing it.
Does it share anything in? Have you played Not Alone? Does it share anything?
I haven't played Not Alone, but you have boards and you put like everybody has their own dry erase board and you're moving around it.
Oh,
so it's a rare double blind game.
Yeah.
But it can be truly terrifying, and it's quite thinky. It's a really old game. You used to be able to just download it and play it with pen and paper. But the Osprey production of, I think it's called Escape from the Aliens in Outer Space. I can't remember. If you just search
I
Osprey.
heard of that one. I heard of that one getting quite a bit of a buzz when it came out.
Yeah, it's great. So I will definitely check out Not Alone because I love that genre. I love hidden media games.
Yeah, this is a decent light one, decent quick one you could easily play with your kids, depending on their age. So that was Not Alone Exploration, and now Andy's going to hype up, what do you know, an 18xx game.
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah, so this was a lucky break for me today because right now I have a student teacher and we're in that phase where I got to make myself scarce so he has no backup and he's got to learn to do things the hard way. So I was in my actually the teacher's lounge working on lesson plans, and I was like, I'm bored with this. I need to do something else with my brain for a bit. So I clicked through BGG and I saw a link that said, hey, blah, blah, blah company found some games of 1862 in the back of their warehouse, and it's online. I'm like, what? Sold. So I went through the website, entered my information as furiously as possible, and
Nice.
So yeah, hyping 1862. So this has been, for at least the last 2 years, kind of a grail game for me because, and especially one that was digging at me because it came out right at the time I was starting to explore 18xx. And I'm like, well, that one looks really complicated. So if I get this 1889 down, and then by the time I got to it, it had disappeared, and it's now $200 plus. So I managed to snag a copy of 1862, and it should be shipping its way over here fairly soon. I had to get it from the UK, so shipping was a little higher, but yeah, no. It was like,
yeah, it's really interesting. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about it because it's I think it's among the more divisive 18xx games. I know people who just love it and people who feel a little confused by it, and I find it totally charming.
The ones I tend to like with the people I play with, I tend to play with more online because of kids and lack of time. But there's some people I play with that like the very clean designs, like 1830. And I'm more I want all the crap in the kitchen sink thrown into it.
Oh, then you'll love
types.
There's just so much it feels, it's just such I don't know, it's such a funny way of describing it. It's such a little English design. It's just very chromy. And it but at the same time it plays really fast. And it's on a small board, and there's a kind of zany. So it's a little zany. I don't know. I think it's great. I think you'll really like it.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, you sound pretty excited about that, and you definitely when Andy was talking in our chat when he got it today, you would have thought that he'd won a contest here. He's like, what is it, Andy? What is it? I bought a game.
Yes.
A game.
No. I bought a game I've been looking for 2 years. That's a different situation.
It's true. It's true.
It's one I've been kicking myself for 2 years of not buying it when I could have paid $60 for it.
Right.
$60? Whoa! How did it ever get that cheap?
Well, it was on its original.
Yeah. It was on Kickstarter, and they were selling copies of it for $60. Actually, on the same site where I just ordered it today from. And then at the time, I'd kind of overextended my budget. I'm like, I'll buy it in a couple months. And then, what was it? I think it was Brexit happened, and the euro tanked and the pound did. So everyone's like, buy games from Britain now. And I'm like, 1862. And I open it up. I'm like, oh, damn, looks like other people had the same idea I did.
Right.
Because they were copies were gone.
Well, you got one now, dude. And it'll be interesting to see what you think of it. And what's interesting to me, Cole, is just that I feel like Andy is so crazy about these 18xx games, and every one that he's brought up, you're like, oh yeah, that one. I had no idea that you were such a connoisseur of 18xx games.
Yeah, one cannot help but be. They're too charming.
Charming. That's such an interesting. And earlier you described a game as naughty. I'd like to clarify. I'd like to clarify, that was Knotty and not Naughty, correct?
Yeah, yes. There are other games that are the other version of that word.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that, Andy. And that would leave us here just about the end here of this great time with Cole. Is there any last points of order, points of business here from our listeners? I know that TC, who is a co-host but is not joining us tonight, he wanted so bad, Cole, for us to battle it out over Time of Crisis.
Oh, really? You don't like it?
Well, I like it so much until you have to like move around your units on the board. And
Oh no, it's okay. I
love the engine you're able to build. I love like the designer cared so much that they don't even make you shuffle your cards. You're literally like choosing your hand. You're in control of so much that like when you do finally get hit by, the randomly generated the invaders, the barbarian tribes, the Gauls and whatnot, or in your late game when you're like, fistful of dice chucking against, a fairly similar force. But I feel like so much of it reminds me of like Clash of Cultures, which was 90% of an amazing game and 10% of a unplayable for me. Like I can't touch this.
Is it because it feels so simple, the movement?
Yeah, the movement's simple and the combat is simple. There's nothing I can say to excuse it. It's just like these units hit on 3s, these units hit on 5s.
So Martin Griffins, who is a fabulous person to follow on BGG and elsewhere, wrote a piece on the exploding 6s in that game, which are less simple than they seem. And Time of Crisis is sneaky about movement, especially because initially the world feels very small in a way that seems out of keeping with the theme, but it's bigger. Like you're never able to move. I've played multiple games that were decided by a person not being mobile enough. And this has to do with like when you build a bunch of legions, you'll have 2 or 3 legions walking around with 2 guys and they're very hard to move. And so like you can't throw your might around as much as you might like to. I don't know. I think that you should keep pushing on it because I think that they couldn't have made it like that. Design shocked me in its like crystal simplicity. It's just so clean. And it makes like nothing in that game was thrown in like by accident or feels lazy. And the other, and speaking to that, like, Christopher Ray, I mean, the guy who designed Sword of Rome. Sword of Rome is a complicated, difficult 10-hour game. And he had been working on this game about the fall of Rome for a long time. And I think everybody kind of assumed it was going to be this big, epic thing. And I know more than a few people who, when they actually got it, they're like, what is this light, weird game? But I think it's a real feat. So I agree that the dice rolling and the movement can feel out of piece with the rest of the design. Like it seems like that should have been built into the deck building.
That's exactly what I say. That's
yeah. And it is sort of in the way that the red actions work, but it is.
Why do you think that the designer chose to make blue actions guaranteed successes? Like the dice rolls for those only matter for the exploding 6s, right. But the red, the combat is so much more just like, this force with, 2 can get.
Well, like you need to have, this is where like Martin Griffiths wrote a blog post about the combat. And I think it's about the combat, like how many dice you need to know if you're going to be successful. And it is similar. So Time of Crisis, I think the reason I like it so much is it is similar to Struggle of Empires in that with newer players, they will oftentimes commit themselves to battles where they have a very small advantage, but they think they have a large one. Mm-hmm. And that they go very poorly. And the game's action economy is so tight that it just will destroy your position. And as players get better at Struggle of Empires, so maybe the listener that was going to play Struggle of Empires, the real advice in that game is do not fight unless you are sure you're going to win. Because
you would carry that over to Time of Crisis as
I
well.
think I would carry that over to Time of Crisis as well. Like the game is a lot more about soft power than it might otherwise seem, and about like, oh, I would rather leave this province than lose a bunch of legions because of how much I've invested in them. We could go on about this for a long time, so I won't hold you. But
No,
at some point, if we're ever at the same con, we should play a game of Time of Crisis.
I think you just made TC, like, I think you just became TC's superhero, because he's been basically, if you check the chat there, it is nothing but he wants to hug you. So it'd be interesting, and I would rather play Struggle of Empires with you, honestly, than I would play.
That's fine too.
But I don't know. Like I really love so much of the game. I really do. But I still don't know. Like, to me, it
Basically
leaves up to chance that I can't come to terms with.
You got to understand that Joe is reincarnated, and one of his past lives worked in a dice factory, and just a pallet of dice fell on him and killed him.
Okay, well, I'm really sorry about John Company. I have really mixed feelings about dice, and like John Company is me coming to terms with dice because it is just a game about risk, and for that reason it is uncomfortable, and sometimes many games of John Company will be decided by the roll of a die. But if you are thinking about that, like that roll is never the thing that decided the game. You always have to kind of like bet, like the war gamer. This is an old war gamering axiom, but they would say, like, if your game came down to one roll, the better question is, why did you let your game come down to one roll?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, man, you cut your teeth on Avalon Hill war games, so
yeah,
totally
there's a different
angle.
With dice. I will say that all of the current projects that I'm working on have little to no dice, and Root actually has a largely deterministic combat. Right now, it uses, and this may change because we're adjusting the numbers, but in Root right now, combat is like a pair of D4s that are just 0, 1, 2, 3. And you pretty well know what's going on when you enter that combat, but it's very minimal in terms of the noise of battle. And all the other projects I'm working on have not even an inkling of chance in it, because I'm ready to take a little bit of a break from dice.
Well, just so it's known, like, I don't hate dice. I love dice. I just have a difficult time with dice telling me whether or not what I already did worked,
right?
As opposed to dice telling me what I can do.
Yeah,
input versus output.
Yes, yeah. That's in John Company, you get both. They're on both sides of that equation, and they just do really mean things. So I recommend approaching John Company more as an experience game. I also did write a no luck or a low luck variant for the game, which I think some people will like. It's just not the way the game was built, because the thing about John Company is that you don't get control over the rate at which you score. This is like the core tension of the game. So you might be scoring a lot, or you may be scoring not at all. And then what you do have a control over is how much money you are asking from the other players to help you score. So like what happens is, like, the players who get lots of opportunities to score, it makes very jagged liquidity, where the players become extremely in debt to each other, because you may only get like 2 opportunities to score an entire game. But you could still win the game if you leverage your position enough. And the dice produce the risk that make those negotiations really interesting. But it also means that sometimes you lose. And that's just, that was in keeping with the theme and everything. But I'm excited to move to slightly more deterministic designs.
Well, that sounds really exciting. I mean, like you said, you approach some games, and other games you play, right?
Right. That's it exactly.
That's an interesting new mindset. I'm a changed man.
All right, I'm glad to hear that.
Well, now that you fixed me, Cole, I think it's about time for us to end this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. It's been so awesome having you on. Our guest designer, Cole Wehrle, currently newly of Leader Games and still doing all sorts of other projects. Thank you so much for being on.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much, guys.
And I am your host, Joe Sallin. I've been joined tonight by
Andrew Dennison.
Trent Ham.
We hope you have a great week of gaming. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us here in the chat. And we will catch you on the next the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.